Hello everyone and welcome back to the coverage of some wild games from the 2020 Chessable Masters. It's Fabiano Caruana versus Jan Nepomniachtchi, and it's a game from the B group of the Chessable Masters. There's A group and there's also a B group, but we're gonna cover that some other day. And it's quite the game, so let's just dive straight into it. Fabi with the white pieces opens with c4, so he goes for the English opening. We have knight to f6, knight to c3, and e5 now. As if white doesn't prevent it, he's hoping to go for d5 on the next move. And here Fabi allows it. He goes for g3, the Carl's Bremen system, and Nepo strikes in the center with d5. We have c captures on d5, knight captures, and bishop to g2, getting a reverse dragon. So knight back to b6, and now d3. This is all super standard stuff, the main line, so nothing out of the ordinary here. Bishop to e7, and here bishop to e3. It's a very popular move. It looks weird as it blocks your own e5 e-pawn, but at some point black will castle, play rook e8, and bring the bishop back to f8, so you will shift this bishop to g5, and you will be able to move your pawn. So castles, and now rook to c1. We have rook to e8, as we've mentioned, and now knight to f3. Fabi now makes room for castles. We have knight to c6, and Fabi just castles. And here, now to add more defense to the pawn, we have bishop back to f8. And now also you might be considering some e4 ideas in the future. And here we have bishop to g5. And this is a well-known move. Wesley So played it, Dinglier, and played it with a lot of success, and most commonly, well, the only move ever played in this position is f6, just blocking this bishop. However, here Nepo goes for queen to d7, and it is already as a move 11 that we have a completely new game. So let's see what Fabi comes up with against this queen to d6 new move idea. First he goes for a3, takes away the b4 square from black's pieces, might be preparing b4 in the future, and h6 now. Nepo just kicks the bishop back, and then he wants to bring his queen back to d8, which is a natural square for the queen. So bishop back to d2, and now queen back to d8. Now you can develop the light square bishop. So knight to e4 by Fabi, preparing to bring the knight over to c5. The knight will be quite the nuisance on c5, and we have a5 here. Nepo wants to go a4 and maybe at some point create some sort of an outpost for his knight on b3 if possible. So knight to c5 by Fabi, and just a4 with the idea of knight to d4. However, we have queen to c2, and now you don't really have the option of going knight to d4 right away, because if knight to d4, then just knight captures and you've opened up this diagonal, so you can just pick up the b7 pawn with an attack on the queen, not something you want to allow. So here Nepo goes rook to a7, adds more protection to the b7 pawn, and rook f to e1, and only now does Nepo go knight to d4. So knight d4. Now of course you want to capture it. If the queen moves, then you get just knight to b3, which is really an awesome square, and knight captures on d4. So e captures, and now as you don't want to be left with a backwards e pawn, now Fabi advances it finally to e4. Nepo captures, d captures on e3, en passant, and the bishop captures on e3. We have c6 now, not allowing this bishop to be such a powerful piece. Now the c6 pawn blocks it very nicely, and now Fabi goes back, knight to e4. We have bishop to e6, finally Nepo develops his light square bishop, and bishop to c2. You have to be careful not to play some silly move like rook d1 to allow bishop to b3. But here we have bishop back to c5 now. This is what Fabi wanted with knight to e4. He wants to trade off the dark square bishops and then get this c5 square for his knight, so his knight can rule there unopposed. So rook back to a8, the rook is no longer needed on the 7th rank, guarding the b7 pawn, and here Fabi trades it off. Bishop captures, we have rook captures, and now knight to c5. And this is now a very strong knight here, attacking both the bishop and the b7 pawn, and now Nepo has to go back. So bishop back to c8. And Nepo's moves really remind me of my four-player chess game on Samai's channel against Vidit Giri and Alexandra, where I just developed the pieces and moved them back. back all the time, and it seemed to be working pretty well. As here Nepo played queen d7 back, rook a7 back, bishop to e6 back, and he just brings his p6 back to their starting squares. So here Fabi goes for rook to e4. He wants to bring the rook over to e1 to double up nicely on the e file, and Nepo immediately counters that with rook to e8. So rook c to e1, Fabi continues to double up, and now just captures. So Fabi gets a nice outpost for his rook here, and here we have rook to a5. You have to bring the rook somehow into the game. For the moment, you still can develop your light square bishop as the b7 pawn hangs, so rook to a5, putting some pressure on the knight here. And we have h3, not allowing a lot of squares for Nepo's bishop to be developed. And at some point you might want to worry about your back rank. If this pawn moves, then the queen covers h7, rook to e8 could be an idea, so you can't really move the queen away from the back rank. So first king to f8, grabbing hold of the e8 square, and now d4, defending the knight, also opening up this diagonal so the queen can also enter the h7 square. And now Nepo goes back, rook to a8. This is a really weird game. And Fabi also goes back, rook to e1, now preparing queen to h7. So g6, you could also go just back with the king g8, but Nepo likes his king on f8. So we have pawn to g6. We have queen to d2 now, pressuring the h6 pawn, and the king to g7, just defending it. And here queen to f4. Again, an excellent square for the queen, and Nepo again has to figure out how to defend. So knight to d7. Of course, he wants to remove this terrible knight on c5, as it's really causing him a lot of problems. You can't really develop anything. And now Fabi just brings it back. Of course, he doesn't want to develop. Knight to e4. Here you probably should go for something like queen to e7. Just pin the knight, as the rook here is undefended, and it's a super complicated position. Like, it's a rapid game. Of course, it's impossible to calculate everything out in a rapid game, but here you could see a lot of crazy ideas, like queen to c7. You even allow f5 to trap the knight. So for example, f5, now you go h4. You don't care about the knight, and after captures, the queen has to move somewhere, and then let's say bishop h3 goes after the knight here. Really strong attack for white. It's very unlikely that black will be able to survive this with the bishop and the rook unable to join the defense. So there are possibilities here. However, queen to e7 is one way to go about it. However, Nepo goes for rook to a5. He wants to improve on this by first, let's say, going rook e5, maybe f5 next, followed by queen e7. Something in those lines. However, rook to a5 blunders the game completely, as well. You should be aware of that, as we've reached the position from the thumbnail. So feel free to pause the video here and win the game for Fabi while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting the two weaknesses, the f7 and the e8 square. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's of course knight to d6, going for the two weaknesses. And now there's a problem. You cannot defend everything. You cannot defend against queen captures on f7 and against rook to e8, as the knight now covers the e8 square. So here, the problem is if queen f6, like getting rid of both ideas, just knight e8 check picks up the queen, a very nice royal fork. If you go for something like, well, there's not much you can go for here. If you try something like f5 to prevent queen captures, then it's just knight captures on c8, queen captures, and rook e7 check. And there's nothing you can do here. King f8, you're going to go rook to h7, and now there's no defense against both this check, which will be followed by checkmate, and also this check, which will be followed by checkmate. I could also use this for a thumbnail, but I'm going to use the other one. So yeah, here you really don't have a move. Like if you go for something like this or something, just captures king g8, and now queen to g7 will be checkmate. So for the lack of a better move, Nepo finds a very creative defense, knight to f6. But now there's another problem, because Fabi's next move, which you've all seen, as you've already found the previous move, really shatters Nepo's defenses. He plays rook to e8. And now that you see it, now of course you also believe it. You remove the defender of the f7 pawn. And of course, if the rook is captured, then just captures with check, king h8, and this now is just game over. You could prolong for one more move by defending the g7 pawn this way, but now knight f6, and there's no defense against both of these mates. Well, you could give up the queen, but that's just silly. So after this rook to e8 move, we have queen to d7. Nepo gets the queen out of the way, but now the bishop on c8 just falls. Rook captures on c8, and again Nepo finds a very creative defense, g5. Now pushing the queen back from the defense of the knight here, but Fabi finds queen to d2. Now attacks the rook on a5 that's undefended. So rook to a6, and again now you have to defend the knight. Somehow Fabi goes for queen to b4. But again, a brilliant defensive idea by Nepo, c5. Now attacks the queen and exposes a double attack here on the knight. So d captures on c5, and here we have rook captures on d6, removing the defender of the rook here on c8. We have c captures by Fabi, and now queen captures here. And now Nepo did not lose a piece or anything. However, Fabi does have this incredibly strong pass pawn, and he also finishes it up nicely with bishop captures on b7. So now it's really an unopposed pawn, and also Fabi's just up 2 pawns. So here queen captures on h3. Nepo wants to minimize the material loss, and now comes queen captures on a4. Now it's 3 passed pawns for Fabi, which will be very hard to deal with. And here, if you go for something like a knight g4, it's really not a problem for white. White just defends with bishop g2, and once you give one check, there's no way to continue this. The bishop is too good of a defender to even try anything here. So after queen a4, we have h5. Nepo now wants to bust open the position here, and Fabi just goes queen d4. Pins the knight here. We have queen to d7, blocking the pawn, attacking the bishop, and bishop goes back to f3. We have h4. If you want to have even any chances here, you have to open up the white's king position and hope for some tricks. So g captures on h4, g captures, queen captures on h4. Nepo even gives up a pawn to create this attack, sort of. And now queen to f5, putting pressure on the bishop. King g2 defending, and now king to f8. And now Fabi's just up 3 pawns, and it's only a matter of time. However, only a matter of time in a rapid game could mean a lot of things if you've seen the previous game, Grishuk versus Magnus Carlsen. Or rather Magnus Carlsen versus Grishuk. So here a4, Fabi starts pushing his past a pawn, and queen g6 check by Nepo. We have queen to g3 blocking. Of course, you cannot trade queens, you are down 3 pawns. So queen f5, and now b4, the pawns are marching forward. So knight d5, and here, while you can trade, and as a general rule, when you're up in material, you should trade. Fabi would much rather trade queens here than just the minor pieces. So queen g4, queen to e5, Fabi of course wanting to trade, and Nepo of course declining, and now queen to c8 check. We have king to g7, and now we have queen back to g4 with check. King f8, and now d7, preparing of course d8 queen. So king e7 blocking this, and now queen to e4. Fabi now finally manages to trade off the queens. We have queen captures, bishop captures, and knight captures on b4 now. So minimizing the material loss. However, bishop to f5 defending it, and it's up 2 pawns in a minor piece endgame. Of course, this is completely winning. So knight to c6, and now comes king f3. Fabi starts bringing the king into the game, king d6, and now king f4. We have f6, now not allowing the king any of these squares, but bishop back to e4. Now trying to give up some material here, but after captures, captures, and captures, of course, the king and pawn endgame is winning for white. White is up a pawn. It's not very mysterious what's happening here. So after bishop e4, we have knight to d8, and now king f5. So not much to do for Nepo here. He captures the pawn, king captures on f6, and now king to d6. Here we have a5, Fabi starts pushing his passed pawn, and knight to e6 now. We have a6, and it was in this position that Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned the game, and a wonderful victory for Fabiano Caruana. Which is a shame for Nepo, as he started his day with a win against Temur Rajabov, so would be great if he didn't lose any games, but as someone said in the live stream, maybe Peter Sviller or Yasser, someone said that it's classic. Nepo starts very strong and then doesn't continue very strong. But yeah, here you resigned, as there is no stopping the pawn. The bishop also covers the queening square, so not much to do here. You could block it, knight c7, a7, and now after, let's say, you give one check, something, you can go back, but then after you queen, that's pretty much it. The pawn will queen, and it's not a problem for white. So of course Ne4 resigns, and a great victory for Fabi. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. We're gonna cover a few more games. I've already seen that one game was a really brutal, very short, and that we're definitely gonna cover it. So that one is probably coming up next. I'm not gonna spoil which one it is. But I would like to thank Emmanuel Mossberger, Paul Nadler, Artem Dombrovsky, Anathan Pillai, and Walter Johnson for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Chessable Masters 2020, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Sunday.